Welcome, everyone, to the Engineer Whisperer podcast. I am really excited to be here today with a special guest that I want to welcome in right now. Welcome, Faisal, to the podcast.
Thanks for having me.
Well, tell us a little bit about you.
Look, I originally come from Bangladesh. As when I was a kid, I used to read a lot of literature and philosophy book from with Eastern philosophical tenet. I came to US to go to engineering school, since we're talking about engineers.
Yes.
Studied computer science. Dropped out of college in my fourth year. Built a software product and started my career. And over the years, I became an entrepreneur, then became a author, and now I do obviously tech-related stuff, but also do a lot of writing related to life, philosophy, transition, leadership, transformation, etc. So that's in a nutshell my life.
Well, thank you. I connected with you because I discovered your writing and your books, and especially the new one, The Reinvent. And I realized that you must have gone through so many transitions. So I wanted to invite you today to tell us more about a few, maybe. So as I'm thinking where to start, maybe what was the most difficult in that transition coming from India, Bangladesh to the US? Because I did a similar big leap in my life. So
Sure.
let's start there.
Look, I mean, every immigrant has very similar stories. Some are luckier than others, but they all have very similar stories, right? When I came to US, this is now we're talking about 35 years ago, or maybe longer. This was mid 80s, late 80s, late 80s time frame. And I came here as a student to go to school. So I ended up in Southern Illinois University, then ended up in University of Minnesota. That's where I met my wife. And it was a very difficult journey because I was one of those massive risk taker. My father was also an engineer. He's retired now. He wanted me to be an engineer, but his kind of engineering, which is civil engineering, and wanted me to stay back home and go to his engineering school, which I didn't want to do. And he was a middle class government, worked for the government, and we didn't have much money, so I had to kind of fend for myself. So that was pretty damn tough because I had to work. My first job was a graveyard shift, janitorial engineering. When you become you clean the floors and the toilets, what's not, and so it was a very difficult journey. But transition. You talk about transition. Every phase of your life, there's different kind of transition. Some happens because of outside factors. Some happens because you yourself want to do something else. So I've gone through many of those
So I'm
in the
curious
last
in that
35.
in that story, Faisal, when you said that your father wanted you to go to the same school and stay back home, but you decided to not do that. So how does someone, a young adult, who in a way against his parents' support, now gonna come to the US? Because I grew up in Europe. It's really hard to come to the US. So this concept of coming to the US, it's a process. So who helped you to come to apply to then get into the university to move? Tell me more.
Things were very different then, in the sense that it was many ways it was simpler, many ways it was very complicated in the sense that you didn't have any internet. You had a very romantic view of what US is or whatever it is, outside of your country, everything is, greener, as they say, right? But I did go to a school called St. Joseph, which was a back home. That's where I did my high school and my, primary school. And this was a missionary school, American missionary school. So I did get exposed to a quote unquote bit of American and Western culture very early on. And we had what they used to call USIS, which is called the US Information Services Center, which was part of US embassies, and they no longer exist. But during those days, it was a kind of like a cultural establishment where you could go and learn about schools and the SAT test that you have to take, and TOEFL as a second English, when English is our second language, how to go through that process, all the places that takes foreign students, the places that gives you quote unquote stipend or scholarship as an undergrad student. So I would, and plus I was a jazz buff, so I would spend tons of time in the USIS and listen to like Miles Davis and the Charlie Munger, those type of jazz musician. And but so I would go there to listen to jazz, but also kind of read up where to go,
You tell
and
your
what to
parents,
apply.
I'm gonna go and study and
Right,
get more
right,
information, but it's
right.
really about the music. Oh,
So that's how it started, and and it gave me a wealth of information. So I applied to like some 70 plus universities, and that costed money, by the way, because every school
every
require admission fee. I mean, sorry, application fee, right?
yes,
So I saved up some money, and I was entrepreneurial from the very beginning. So I used to actually sell stereo equipment to make up some side pocket money, and that's how I applied to those schools. And I got admission, but most of the schools wouldn't offer me any scholarship because as a foreign student, you're supposed to be funded by your family,
yes,
right? So
yes.
but a couple of schools did offer me scholarship, very little, but they did. Southern Illinois University in Carbondale was one of them, but it was only $700 so per semester. That wasn't much. So then once I got here, after first year, I applied to a whole bunch of other schools to get scholarship, and I ended up getting a full ride in University of Minnesota in Duluth, and that's where I ended up. And that was a shocker because, I mean, back home in Bangladesh, obviously you don't have a whole lot of winter or snow like you have in US,
Yeah.
especially in Duluth, Minnesota, because the Duluth, Minnesota. I mean, if you think Seattle is cold, you haven't seen anything. I mean, Duluth, Minnesota is one of the coldest places on the planet, right? So
I bet.
maybe not as Alaska or North Pole, but it's pretty close to it. So I ended up going there because a friend of mine was there, and that's kind of how it happened. Um, this entrepreneurial mindset and being resilient and threshold for pain. I think I had it. It's kind of my it's in my DNA. I can survive. So that served me well.
And what was some of the beliefs that you can, I would like you to share with us at a young age that you had that carried you through? Because 19 is a young age to
Yeah,
to
yeah.
be away and to land in a totally new culture with knowing nobody in a new educational system. And there was a lot to learn there, and then financially had financial constraints there. So almost like, what did you believe about yourself that kept you going?
When you're young, you're kind of, that famous tagline from, not tagline, saying by Steve Jobs, be foolish and adventurous, kind of like that. So when you're young, you feel invincible and you're naive. So you don't know any better, right? So for example, when I made all the travel arrangement, I landed in St. Louis. From St. Louis, I needed to go to Carbondale. I had no way of go. I didn't know how to go to Carbondale, and I landed around 6 o'clock, and there was nothing. It's a whole different story, but I just didn't know. I mean, I didn't know that you have to actually no transportation until the next day. So you're very naive and you jump into it. But the belief system that I had, and is that you have to try things and you have to believe in your journey and you have to have the faith that this is the inner strength that you have to have, that it's going to be all right, and even when it's things are not all right, it'll be okay, right? And that really served me well. And I'll tell you my recent story. It kind of stayed with me, and but when you're young, you are much bigger risk taker, right, than when you are older, because when you're young, you know less, so you don't imagine the worst case scenario. When you're older, you learn, you know more, so you know what can happen, right? So it's a bit different.
Yeah, it's almost like the wisdom, the knowledge goes against you because it hasn't turned
Sure.
into wisdom yet.
Right.
Yes. Well, I'm always curious because there's that moment of people think that we push through, and then at some point we think about, well, I could always go back. And if it's so bad where I am right now, as you said, immigrant and myself, then I know I always have a fallback. I can buy a plane ticket, and the worst is I can go back. But so that's where I was asking, because
No,
you
I
didn't.
didn't have that. I didn't have that mentality. Going back and
Yes.
not
Yes.
making it
So
wasn't an
something,
option.
so
Yeah.
what was behind there that was also
I
pushing
didn't
you?
have any plan C. I didn't have any plan B. There was only a plan. The plan was I got to go to school. I have to figure out how to go to school. And then as things got tougher and tougher, then I started saying maybe school isn't for me. I got to go to work, because this part-time work and going to school became a really daunting, because, as you know, I mean, since you have an engineering background and you talk to engineers all day long, engineering school is not a walk in the park. I mean, it requires a lot of rigor and it requires a lot of time and effort if you really want to learn, right? And so, and then oddly enough, what I discovered, and during that time, I mean, the things were just beginning to change. What I call the second phase of computing started, right? Meaning we started to see, because we were talking about late 80s, so
Yes.
the emergence of desktop computing and network computing started happening. And I was going to computer science school and computer engineering school, and we're still stuck in like legacy environments. So I was always a kind of like a
Oh.
forward thinker. So I started honing my skills on the network computing and desktop computing, and how the end user are going to start utilizing computing power to enhance their domain expertise. So I built a software platform, or a software application that will take data from legacy environment like mainframe and VAX and pull it
Mhm.
on a desktop. And so what I did, I came up with a demo disk in my fifth year, and I was actually working for a computer shop, and a network shop in Duluth. So I learned all this while I was working. I wasn't learning any of this stuff in school. So I created a demo disk, and I sent out this demo disk in a bunch of trading houses in New York and a bunch of R&D shop in New York. And I took another risk, coming to New York for 2 weeks, set up like 10, 15 interviews based on that demo. I didn't send out my resume. I sent out a demo,
Demo.
on a floppy disk. And I ended up getting like 6 job offers after my 2 weeks of interviews. And during that time, economy wasn't that good, because now we're talking about 90s, like just early 90s. So we're talking about 90, 91. So economy was also kind of weird, but I ended up getting job offers, and that kind of, so this unconventional path has always served me well. And I have, you talk about transition. The older I got, and more I learned about things, the unconventional path has always kind of worked for me. But it's with not initially when I started, was it like a naive belief and
Mhm.
naive courage, if you want to call that.
Mm-hmm.
But as I've gotten older, it's more about learning from devotion and detaching myself from fear. That's what keeps me going on it. That has kept me going in every transition.
Tell me more about that. How did that mindset shift come about?
Yeah.
Because I do work with a lot of engineers, and the belief or the myth is that you have to finish the engineering school before you become successful. But what you did is, well, I don't need this. I recognize I'm ahead of my time and I want to be current with all the new emerging technology. So you created the opportunity for yourself, which I believe in,
Yeah.
with sending those floppies. So what was that mindset transition? Tell me more.
Look, it was, if you talk about during that time, it was the fact that I really needed, I was so fatigued from 7 by 24 hours of doing stuff and constantly being broke as a student. I just couldn't take it anymore, right? And so it was out of necessity because as they say, necessity is the mother of invention. So it was that, but it's also the fact that I was always kind of I've been always been able to foresee the industry trend before most people do. That's an entrepreneurial trait, and it's not just me who drops out of college. I mean,
Yes.
I'm not by no means I'm I've done anything remotely close as some of these famous entrepreneurs, but we have all have the same kind of a mindset where you get this bug of building something and you run with it, and especially so if you look at the whole last 50 years of history, the largest company founders never finished schools, right? I mean, whether it's Gates or whether it's whether it's uh, Jobs or recent example of Zuckerberg or any of these people, because they get this bug and they got to do it. But mine wasn't because I wanted to build a company. I just wanted to have a decent income so that I could have like 3 meals a day and a roof over my head. And I was, I fell in love, so I was about to get married, and so I just wanted to do that piece of it, right? And that was my motivation. And now later I became an entrepreneur, and I've gotten quite successful at it over the years. But
So tell me about that
it
fear piece,
sure.
your relationship with the fear. That's tell me more.
So fear during those days, the fear was, when I came to US, is like, okay, how do I put food on the table and start? And I did, at one time I didn't eat for 3 days, and so I know the meaning of starvation, which was something very new because I
Wow.
don't come from a very poor family. I come from a middle class family, so it is not like I had never experienced hunger. Right? So, but during that time, the cold and hunger, it was. I know what that feels like, and I told myself that I never wanted to feel that again. Right. So that was one. Right.
Yep.
So that's that. And then as time went by, my career took off almost immediately. I started working for Pitney Bowes, from that demo that I sent out, which was at that time a Fortune 500 company. And then I went to work for Dun& Bradstreet, started my first company, uh, was immediately successful, got Chase Manhattan Bank as my customer. I wanted to raise money. GE Capital came and took my technology, and we started a startup company uh, inside GE Capital, which was unheard of during those days because people just didn't do that kind of things. And it went on from there. But then, in my second company, by the way, um, this was a interesting learning because I left GE and started my next company, and immediately we were very successful. We were in middleware software business, and it was a very complex technology because it's infrastructure technology. It's an infrastructure product, and so I raised a lot of money. Long story short, and I got fired from my own company. Investors took it over and ran the whole thing to ground. I lost a lot of money, and I got very, that was like a that was a major blow in a pretty rising career in my 20s, right? So at that time, I was, I got this fear that I will never succeed as an entrepreneur, and I would never be able to build anything that I was able to do in, early on, right? So fear comes many form, many different times. So what I did, I actually sat there and wrote a book. This is right before internet bubble. This was my first book, called E-Enterprise,
Oh, yes.
and it was on the theory was that, the technology is meaningless if you don't have business model, and all these companies that are building technology and pushing fictitious business model are going to fail. And it did fail. I mean, we had the internet bubble, and lots
Yes.
of companies went bankrupt and whatnot, and we had a market crash, as probably
But where
many
did
of
the
them.
writing the book coming from? Because you were
It was
just
a therapy. It was like
okay, okay.
it
So
was
to process your
moving.
fear, is that
It was
in a
not
way?
processing my fear. It was like, it's like giving a message to the markets. And my thinking in terms of as a writer wasn't that deep, because I was just starting to write, right? So, just like everything else, whether
Yes.
you're a chef or a writer or artist or an
Yes.
engineer, the more you do it, the deeper it gets, right? So it wasn't that deep, but the theory from a market point of view was correct, in the sense that I kind of predicted right before the bubble that this is all going to go away, and it did happen.
But from
And
a
it got, yeah, go
but
ahead.
from a human perspective, what
Right.
was, because as you said, you just had a big unsuccessful event. You
Hmm.
you were demoted by the investors. You're not a CEO
Right.
anymore. You're just thinking, I will never be successful. And then you're
Right.
saying, I'm gonna go write a book now. So there's
Because I had nothing else to do. I
okay,
didn't have
okay.
anything else to do, right? I wasn't I couldn't come up with I mean, I couldn't immediately come up with what I would do next. And I did have a little bit of money from
That's
the
good.
previous company. This was second company, so I had a little bit of money to survive, for a year or two. And it was okay. We were very young and we didn't have much. The so uh, the fear the fear turned into a motivation of writing why these investors were wrong, and why a lot, because the my investors mentality at that time was, as like any other investor, that bigger faster is better, but that is not the case, especially when you talk about enterprise problem solving, because I've been always in business to business enterprise problem area, which are complex. They're not like B2C, where you come up with something and it takes off, and
Yes.
it's not like that. It's much more engineering, if I can. It's much more process centric.
Sure.
It's much more boring, right?
Yes.
Um, so that happened, and then I did. So the book came out, and I started another company. That company I've gone through up and down for following 15 years, and this is where my writing also flourished. I ended up writing like 5, 6 books, and then I also started tap into my my Eastern philosophical days from high school, and did bunch of these quote unquote transformative trips in Japan, because I had a board member and a friend who happens to be Japanese, who was Toshiba's chairman and CEO, and he took me on like one of his kids, because he was quite older than me, and he took me to Japan. And so my whole mentality about life, leadership, entrepreneurship, survival completely changed, during those. This is now we're talking about um, early 2000 era, right? And I wrote a book called Everything Connects. And Everything Connects was very different kind of book, because it talked about how do you connect with yourself, and how do you overcome your view of your limitation, and connect with the rest of the world, and create a value. And the value doesn't necessarily mean financial value. It could be any, however you want to define value, right? So it
Yes.
could be invention, it could be the dishes that you create as a cook or whatever, right? So that however you want to however you want to channel your authentic self and create a value. That's the definition of value. So this is where I heavily explore the idea of devotion, detachment, mindfulness, resiliency, etc., etc.
So you were
So
in your
after
30s when you were exploring this? I'm keeping
mid 30s, yeah,
mid
I would say
30s.
mid to late 30s, early
Okay.
40s time frame, right? So because it's retrospective, right? So you go through life and then you start looking back and
Yes.
you kind of discover who you were and who you become and where do you want to go next, right?
Well,
So
if you take the time, most people, even in their 60s, I know, have trouble sitting down and figuring out who they are. So I want to recognize you because, yeah, even the late 30s is early in in the U.S. societal word to do that. It almost sounds like that you having that, losing your company and the CEO, the position of being a CEO was one of the best things that happened to you because
100%.
it
Yeah, I wouldn't be
brought
who
you
I am.
into
Yeah,
the transition.
absolutely. And it's not just that, so every I'm strictly for speaking from a personal point of view, right? In every adversity that I have encountered, right? I am very fortunate to, especially now, to look at those as an opportunity and kind of created my next chapter. So I'll tell you what has happened recently. So so I did so I built so I ran that my other company for 15, 16 years, and we did a lot of amazing things. And I created a research institute, and then I wrote that book, Everything Connects. And this is where my next phase of transition started happening, where I said, I mean, building companies, tech companies is interesting and it's meaningful and it has its own reward, and you get to work with some of the most amazing customer, because I always work with very big brands like Pepsi and Amex and those type of people. But I kind of started losing that kind of motivation, and my mother started getting sicker. So I exited out of that company, and I kind of went in a hiatus for a year, and then I got the next bug of that. Whatever I learned, from commercial world, I wanted to bring that into our public sector because I thought I could help our government. So so I had customers like Northrop Grumman and CSC, who does a lot of work in public sector. They do defense work, and so I started that journey about 6 years ago, whereby I've taken all my IP and helping these complex government agencies, especially in DoD and DHS, to transform the company, transform their organization so that they can uh, utilize the public money and the strategy they take for to add more value to the citizen and to our nation, right? So that's been my next calling, right? So while that's happening, pandemic hit obviously, and my son, I have only one child, he during that time turned 18, during the pandemic. We're talking about 3, 4 years ago, and he started his school in Hofstra, which is in Long Island. I live in Connecticut, so he started his school in Hofstra, and he came home, because the campus shut down, and I thought, he got COVID. Turns out he has a rare blood cancer. So that was a huge a talk about as a parent, a
Oh
huge
yeah.
blow. and
Oh yeah.
and and it's a kind of disease that it doesn't have, you can, there's a lot of treatments, and he's good and he's doing well. I'm
Good to
couldn't
hear.
be more grateful, but it doesn't have a cure, right? So at that time, and what also happened, that my publicist, who has been my publicist for the last 20 years, he said, Faisal, it's post-pandemic, you wrote Everything Connects. 6 years, 7 years ago, it's time to do another book. So I started writing, and that's when I started writing Lift. This is when I found out that my son was sick, and I almost didn't do Lift, but my publicist reminded me that her son is also a cancer survivor, so we have that in common. And she said, you kind of have to push forward. So I used that motivation to crank out 3 books, and so Lift came out. It became #1 Wall Street Journal bestseller. I released the second edition of Everything Connects, where I added a huge section on mindfulness and resiliency. And then I cranked out Reinvent, and we created a organization called Next Chapter, where all my proceeds goes to cancer research on behalf of my son. So you talk about transition. So as you can, hopefully your audience can, hear the various transition of life. Some are by choice, some are not by choice, but you adapt, right? And you make the best out of it, and you find different motivation, and definition of success is different at different stages of your life. So obviously, when I came here as an immigrant, a teenager, it was about survival, putting food on the table.
Yes.
Thankfully, I don't have that need anymore. I can put food on the table, but it's a different motivation for the tech stuff that I explore. I'm still a pretty hands-on technologist. And my recent research work is all around, just like 1,000 others are on,
Yeah, you can take the engineer out of the engineer. Let's be clear there.
Right.
But Faisal, I'm so curious. I'm so curious about when you said your publisher, asked you to write the book, and you wrote Lift. How did you lift yourself up? Because that's, I think, one of those pivotal moments in life where somebody might be in that same situation, that we found out somebody in our family has cancer, or maybe that person has it, or so something similar, somebody sitting with that in that situation, and they don't know how to lift themselves up. So maybe who helped you? What was the process as an engineer that you went through? How did you lift yourself up?
So funny saying Lift, because the fundamental message in Lift is that you can't lift others if you cannot lift yourself first. That's why it's called Lift. And so fortunately, I have a very strong support system. I have amazing. I don't have tons of quote unquote close friends. I have like 1 or 2 of these friends. They're like part of my everyday life. I talk to them every day. That certainly helped. I mentioned my publicist. He's one of those people as well. We have excellent access to care, and obviously as a family, we're pretty strong. Me and my wife and even my son, we're pretty strong, mentally pretty strong. We have this innate DNA of resiliency built into us. And I wrote a book called Survive to Thrive, by the way, by interviewing 9 people who happens to be a cancer survivor. That was many years ago. So I kind of learned from people, but also from my life. But it's a couple of things. It's your outlook. It's not the outlook of never giving or giving up, right? So that's the basic fundamental, the human trait of being a survivor, right? So that's one. Second is the community that you built around you. Your neighbor, your caretakers, and the friends and family that you have. Those are crucial. And the third element is how do you turn that motivation into caring about others, right? So I, oddly enough, I've been donating to places like St. Jude's forever, and so I was already familiar with all these cancer surviving children, and I do a lot of donation to food shelters and things like the Jose Andres' food charity. places like that. So I kind of turned that into a almost like a half of my time now goes into thinking about this. So I took that motivation of my son's struggle and turning into helping others, and which actually builds strength in myself to take care of him. Because when you think about other people and
Yes.
you practice empathy and gratitude on a daily basis, somehow your struggle seems to be less. And you think about world as in general. I mean, look at all the stuff that's going on everyday basis, the war, the
Yes.
the famines, anything and everything, right?
Yes.
The children dying, when you start thinking about that, somehow your trouble seems to be a lot less. And I consider myself extremely fortunate because I have means, I have access to take care of him. I have medical access. I can tap into other people. Not everybody is that fortunate. So when you start thinking about other people and you kind of pass on that empathy and you extend that empathy, thinking about other people, and you practice gratitude on a daily basis, things somehow seems always better than what it is. So
Well, thank you for sharing. I think it's important to hear it from people like you, uh, from those who went through it, because I'm a big believer too. I grew up during communism with nothing on the shelves, and so
yeah,
poverty, and I believe that poverty exists on TV and in the social media, but it's all around us, like literally, as you said, our
yeah,
neighbors, the our kids go to school with. It might not look like what we think poverty looks like, and it might not just be
yeah,
financial. It could take so many different forms, but
yeah,
just being aware of it and walking with that empathy and compassion through life. I'm a big believer that even though I might not have much, I can always give to someone who has less than me. And because I have been in that situation, like you,
yeah,
coming in and
yeah,
having only $100 in my pocket. So
yeah, sure.
I love it. Thank you for sharing. I hope that inspires who's listening to think about their strategies and processes to bring in engineering, of how they can build in lifting others so that they can lift themselves into their lives if they haven't yet. That that's that's one of the hopes that I'm hoping people take away. So before we close, I wonder if you're going through any transition right now, or maybe you're writing a book. This book has been also a theme here,
Yeah,
something
no,
that you can share with us.
look, I'm always going through transition, and I mean, after I wrote, everything connects. I didn't write for 6 7 years, but then once I started writing Lift, I have this new inspiration of writing, and because I'm trying to raise as much money as I can for a cancer research, so that is a motivation. So I am working on my next book, which is around using technology for healthcare, and not just for healthcare, but uplifting and unleashing human potential with new technologies like AI. So I'm working on that, but I'm also working on a couple other things that has the potential of creating recurring revenue for these kind of charitable goals that I have, from a non-profit point of view, right? But I mean, an entrepreneur is an entrepreneur, so there's always the next one, and the next one, and next one. So I learned a lot in the last 6 7 years in working with, the our Department of Defense and DHS and other places. So I'm also looking to expand on that, from the commercial side. But look, but the motivation is different in the sense that it's not like, when do I get to build my next $1 billion company or $1 million company. It's not driven by that. These days is very much driven by impact, and is very much driven by is it going to help somebody, and is it going to help our country, or is it going to help the society? My mind revolves around that because I've been so fortunate. As tough as it's been for me in terms of, coming from outside, but this is a very typical, this is very ordinary, typical story for millions of immigrants that built this nation, right? So it's nothing that special. So I don't consider myself, all I consider myself that I'm very fortunate to be able to do what I get to do, and explore all these things, and live where I live, and call this country as my country and my home, and the fact that I can take care of my family, along with taking care of other things I do take care of. So I find motivation in that.
Impact. I love how you brought that in, that it's that evolving transition as the humans. First you started with, I wanted food on the table, I wanted to eat 3 times a day, and now it's about impact, and I'm sure that includes food in there. And I read that you love to cook, so food is present in your life.
100%, always.
We keep the things that we value, as I say.
Sure.
You can't take that out of us. So thank you for sharing. Is there something on the personal level, maybe a mindset or a perception, or that you are growing right now, that you're learning about and you're expanding?
Look, I mean, a lot of the things we talked about, whether it's devotion, we could probably talk for hours just on the topic of this has become my favorite personal and professional leadership topic, which is balance between devotion and detachment, right? What I mean by that, you have to be devoted to your craft and your skill and purpose, whatever, but you also have to be able to detach from the outcome, because you can't control the outcome. Detachment is a practice that it's like letting go.
Yes.
There's 1,000 different ways of defining detachment.
Yes.
But the life is, and I can see the quote in the back that you have about life is about, and it's kind of, so taking from that, and what I believe is, it's the dance and the balance between devotion and detachment that makes a good leader, that makes a good entrepreneur, that makes a good innovator, engineer, and a person who's trying to survive but ultimately thrive. But that's a daily practice. So I struggle with that, right? So because, well, I mean, you talk about personal, like, I mean, there are days when I get utterly, anxiety driven, thinking about, well, what's the future of my child, my only child, who struggles on a daily basis, right? But I have to detach myself, because you have to just look at the positive side and all the good things that are happening, and all the scientific advancement that are happening in the world to take care of these kind of diseases and making our lives better, right? So you have to be optimistic from that point of view. So the practice of this devotion and detachment and driving that balance and creating that balance is something that's crucial. And actually, it is even more crucial as we have technological advancement, because I'll just finish my talk, our conversation on that note. AI can do a lot of different things. It will do a lot of good things, but AI also has a huge potential to be very, very destructive, right? So this is where we have to build that balance and create that detachment and governance model that allows us not to destroy ourselves, right? So which will require practice by every single one of us, because AI is nothing but a learner from global society, right? So it's a learning system at the end of the day. So whatever behavior and things that we're putting out there, that's what we're feeding that monster. That's both on a personal and a professional note that I'm trying to practice.
Devotion and detachment. Well, on that note, if someone wants to hear more, then, pick up one of Faisal's books, and reach out to him as well. If people want to connect with you, is there a best way to reach out to you?
I mean, you can, you found me on LinkedIn. So
did.
LinkedIn is where I post every day on all of these topics that we just talked about. That's really the only social media I tend to use these days. So you can obviously find me on LinkedIn. You can go to my website. All of this knowledge sharing and writing is 100% for charity. So you can take whatever you want and you can use whatever you like, from these writings or whatever I learned. I try to pass it on. My learning is not just from research; is actually living through life. So whatever I know is very personal. So that's what I try to pass on. So anybody wants to take advantage of that, welcome to visit my website, which is faisalhoque.com. Go to my LinkedIn page or go to Amazon. All the books are, has got audio as well, and ebook. So if you are hooked into digital media, take advantage of the digital media.
Well, thank you very much for your time. Thank you for being here. I'm so grateful to sit down with you. And for me, it's personal. It's finding people who inspire me and then giving them the mic literally to then inspire others. So I think you did that today. You inspired
Thank you
me,
so much.
and
Thank
that's
you. I'm
what,
honored.
one person at a time. So thank you again.
Thanks for having me.